As we reported earlier, after much debate, Congress today passed a short-term extension of the Highway Trust Fund. But years of cutbacks in federal and local transportation funding are being felt in communities around the country. The NewsHour's Kat Wise takes a look at some of the key transportation issues facing Portland, Oregon, and the surrounding region.
Early one morning this week, as thousands of commuters drove overhead, Oregon Bridge Inspector Joel Booth hoisted himself 100 feet up in the air and got to work.
We're looking at the welds, the potentially cracks along the welds.
Booth was doing a routine inspection of one of the state's busiest bridges, the Markham Bridge, built in 1966. It carries about 90,000 vehicles a day on Interstate 5 over the Willamette River near downtown Portland. Unlike some of the bridges in the area, it's in fairly good shape, but it's still got some issues.
So actually on both sides of those pin hanger locations, we've had problems.
Issues that are being closely monitored by the state's chief bridge engineer, Bruce Johnson.
They found some pack rust, so we've got some corrosion going on. We're losing some section in our steel. The other issue, this bridge has had a lot of fatigue cracking. And of course we've mitigated the cracks by doing repairs. But we're concerned about the performance of our repairs and how the cracking is going.
Johnson says maintaining bridge safety is a huge task for the state.
Well, in Oregon, we have an old inventory of bridges. We haven't been funded to systematically upgrade and renew our infrastructure. So in a lot of cases, we've been patching together and trying to keep old bridges operational and safe. But also in Oregon, we're vulnerable to a very, very large Cascadia subduction zone. And when that happens, unfortunately, we're not prepared.
The Cascadia subduction zone is a fault line off the coast of the Pacific Northwest that scientists believe is capable of producing a major 8.0 or larger earthquake in the next 50 years. When the big one hits, many of the bridges in the state are expected to collapse, including the Ross Island Bridge in Portland and the Interstate Bridge, an important artery for the region connecting Portland to Vancouver, Washington. The price tag for seismically upgrading Oregon's bridges is hundreds of millions of dollars. Money, Johnson says, the state doesn't have.
In Oregon, because of reduced state funding, we rely heavily on federal funding to do the majority, the serious, the heavy work, the major rehabilitation and replacement of our structures.
Repairing and doing seismic upgrades to the bridges here in Portland and around the state is a top priority for local officials. But Oregon, like many states around the country, has a long list of much-needed transportation projects that in recent years have been impacted by cuts to federal spending. The cutbacks in transportation funding are being felt in the town of Newburgh, which sits on a major route from Portland to the Oregon coast. Traffic backups here are notorious. A new bypass for the area has been in the works for years, but the state's original plans for a 4-lane, 11-mile highway were scaled back several years ago to a 2-lane, 4-mile road. Not enough federal funding.
Traffic's always on everybody's mind.
26-year-old Allie McLeod is a carpentry apprentice who grew up here and was hired to work on the project. She says many in the local community are worried the shorter bypass won't actually solve the traffic problems.
They're all pretty upset about it. I mean, knowing a lot of people from the area, everybody's just like, well, we'll see if it works or if it doesn't work.
The cost of the $175 million project has been shouldered by the state, and that's meant some creative financing, according to Tom Fuller with the Oregon Department of Transportation.
Normally, the federal government pays for about 90% of construction projects. The state pays for about 10%. There just isn't any federal money for us to do projects like this, so the state's got to get very creative. So we do things like selling bonds, using lottery money, even coming up with entirely new ways of charging people for driving on the roads. We've got to do something because the need's not going away, even though the dollars aren't there from D.C.
The federal transportation dollars aren't just used to build new freeways. They also trickle down to the local level, where they're needed for much more basic projects. So no sidewalk here, I see.
Right. And this is a very busy, fast-moving street that goes...
Leah Treat is the director of Portland's Bureau of Transportation. She took me to a neighborhood she says highlights the need for more funding, from pedestrian improvements to road repair.
We can replicate this situation in dozens of areas around the city where we have 300 miles of missing sidewalks in the city. So we have close to 5,000 lane miles of roadway in the city of Portland. And with our limited resources, we're only able to do preventative maintenance on 100 miles a year.
The city also wants more federal funds for innovative projects like the new South Waterfront neighborhood, developed with a mix of federal, state, local, and private funds, and which offers people a variety of transportation options. The country's first ever bridge, open only to bikes, pedestrians, and transit, not private cars, will open in September. Jennifer Dill, who studies national transportation issues, says there's a need for more such projects.
And there's a lot of cities in the U.S. right now that really want to invest in more multimodal systems, more pedestrian infrastructure, bike infrastructure, more innovative types of infrastructure. And the feds have been lagging a little behind on that.
Oregon transportation officials say the temporary highway funding deal worked out in Washington this week is a good step, but they'd rather have a long-term, consistent source of funding from the federal government. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Kat Wise in Portland, Oregon.